Hi, I'm Kristen and this is Scrap Fabric Love, and today I'm going to tell you all about how I got my first ever quilt in a magazine. It wasn't my first ever quilt that I made, but it's the first time that I've had a quilt in a magazine, and it's Love Patchwork Quilting issue 149, and I'm super excited. So the quilt is called Scrappy, and I designed it for patterned and solid fabric scraps. And so I'm so excited to show you a little bit more about what the quilt is about. And then also, for those of you who are interested, either because you want to get a quilt in a magazine or because you're just curious, I'm going to talk through the process of how I went about approaching the magazine and how it ended up inside. So here's the magazine. It's called Love Patchwork Quilting, which is the most popular quilting magazine here in the UK where I live, which is why I'm so excited. And that it's a physical magazine. My quilt, you can see in the table of contents there. I really love this photography they've done with the purple wall in the background, and then my pattern is here. So there's my little name in an actual printed magazine. Anyways, so if you buy the issue, you get obviously all of the instructions, and then there is of course the FPP template, which is what you need to use to make the hexy blocks. So the whole quilt is made up of these 4 quadrants, so it's the same block repeating, just in different colorways. And so I've grouped the orange scraps, pink, green, and purple sort of in the quadrants. And the idea is that there's half of the hexagon is a pattern fabric and the other half is a solid fabric in the same sort of colorway. And then the background is a mix of kind of low volume prints. If you've seen the channel before, you know I love that kind of a background on a scrappy quilt because it gives the negative space, but you still get to use lots of different bits and pieces and you don't need yardage. So I designed the quilt a few years ago, actually. I had it written out in various sizes. I had like a baby size and a throw size, which is usually kind of like my favorite. And I had 2 different border options, and I had the whole thing. I think I might have even paid someone to tech edit it, which if you haven't heard of that, that's like getting someone who's really good at editing and quilt math and stuff to look over your pattern for you. And then I kind of just, I don't know why, I just lost the confidence about putting it out for sale. If you watch the channel, you'll know I design lots of quilts. I give away lots of free patterns. But if you visit my Etsy shop, I've only got one quilt pattern you can buy on there. So although I do talk about on this channel being a confident beginner and sort of just jumping in and trying things, I still have my own mental blocks about some stuff, and selling patterns, I guess, is one of them, even though I know that's a big part of running a sort of quilting business like the one I've got. So I kind of decided to submit this quilt pattern, which I really liked, but I just, for some reason, just wasn't making the leap to put it up on my website, to a magazine, because one of the things that your quilt has to be in order to be in a magazine is new, right? So you can't have already sold the pattern. You can't have already showed it in a show, as far as I know. And it's meant to be sort of like unveiled in the magazine, essentially. And once, if they do accept it, then they get the rights to it, either forever, if you sign that kind of contract, or for the one that I think is more common, which is the one that I signed, for 6 months. So they have the rights to this pattern for 6 months from when the magazine comes out. I can't turn around and start selling the pattern on my website now, but I can in 6 months' time. So I thought that would be a good way for me to kind of get over that little mental hurdle. If they like it enough to put it in a magazine, then obviously it would be okay to sell it in 6 months when I get the rights back. So anyway, that's what I decided to do. So I found the email address just here. So it's in the, if you look a few pages in, so you've got the table of contents, and then there is this other page with like the editor's picture and all of that. This little tiny print underneath the magazine logo, that's where you have all the contact details. And so I'm pretty sure it was just the editorial email address that I used to contact the magazine originally. So what I put in the first email was like an introduction, who I am. I explained that I have a YouTube channel and a blog. At the time though, the YouTube channel, so this was last July, that's how long these things take to happen. So last July was when I sent the email. And at the time, I think my channel was quite a bit smaller than it is now. So I'm not sure how much having the YouTube channel really influenced it or not. But anyway, I obviously gave them the links to those. And then I explained what the pattern was, that it was made of one repeating foundation paper piecing block. That's that kind of hexagon, and that it's made for scraps. And I sent some like mock-ups of the different sizes that I had of the quilts, as well as some pictures of test blocks that I'd done and a wall hanging that I'd done using this block. So previous to submitting the quilt to the magazine, even though I really liked the pattern, I hadn't actually made the whole quilt. So I'd used the block pattern in various ways for various different gifts to family and friends. So I made a quilt for my sister that just had like a row of the block in it. And I made a little wall hanging for somebody. And then I also made a quilt for my friend Jackie, not quite following the pattern, but close. So I had tested the block and tested how it looked with the background fabrics and things, but I hadn't made the whole quilt yet, ever. So anyway, so I sent her the photos that I had and the mock-ups that I had. I also included, the size that the quilt was, and I indicated that I didn't mind what kind of fabrics I used for it, because obviously I had designed it for scraps. So the idea was that you would be using all sorts of bits and pieces that you just have around and grouping them in colors. If you've seen the channel before, that's what I like to do, is group the scraps in the colors. So anyway, so I said, whatever kind of fabric, because I know that magazines often are kind of in collaboration with fabric companies. Maybe there's something they were trying to promote, or a particular sort of fabric color, that might be in vogue in this season that I don't know anything about. There might be like sometimes magazines would be themed around pastels or bright color or something like that. I was thinking. So I left that to them. I have been in a couple of digital magazines before, not anything to the size or as well known as this one. And I have previously submitted sort of my color submission of what I thought the pattern should be. And they've come back and said, oh, yeah, could you do it in slightly more muted tones or whatever? So I did know that sometimes they come back and want to change the colors. So I just kind of, she could see the colors that I was sort of thinking of in the mock-up. And I thought, otherwise, I'll just leave that decision to them if they're interested. So I heard back, I think it was about 3 weeks. So if, don't get disheartened if you sent an email and they don't reply the next day or even the next week. I think I had kind of forgotten about it by then, but they're busy. They've got probably loads of emails coming in. So it was someone called Lorna who got back to me, and she said she liked the idea, was interested in it, wanted to know if I could do it in a slightly different size to what I had listed with, she'd kind of picked one size and one border option and kind of mashed them together from the options that I'd given her, which really was kind of a cool suggestion, just to get some feedback on the pattern as well of what someone who runs a quilting magazine might think would be more interesting to quilters. So that was cool. And I was open to doing that. And then she sent me the details of kind of how all the different contracts work. So the two options of whether or not they own the rights forever or they own them for 6 months. So I chose the one where the magazine owns the rights for 6 months. So you get paid slightly less for that option than you would if you were just going to give them the rights. But I think the difference, so I can't remember what it was if you just gave them the rights, but I don't think it was massively more. So what I got paid to put the quilt in the magazine is £180. So it's not to be sniffed at, but it's also probably not a huge amount of money for the work that's involved in kind of writing up the pattern, making the whole quilt, and all of that. So I wouldn't say that having your quilts in magazines would be a massive money spinner necessarily, unless I suppose it gets your name out there and then people either go and buy your patterns from your online shop, or maybe they want to book you for a workshop or to talk at a guild or something like that. I think it's more about kind of the exposure. I basically just wanted to have done it. So I didn't have any massive expectations about what's going to come out of having a quilt in a magazine. It was more of another one of these mental hurdles that I felt like I wanted to cross. So if you've If you have watched the channel from the beginning, which I know some subscribers have, you probably have heard me say things like, I'm not putting my quilts in quilt shows. Kind of at the first couple years I was saying, I don't know about you, but I'd never put my quilt in a quilt show. And now I do. Now I do every year because I just sort of crossed that mental hurdle. And I'm not, and I've said before on the channel, I'm not entering the quilt shows to win, but I had a mental block about my quilts aren't good enough to go in a show. And then once I kind of sat and re-examined that and thought, why not? Then now it's become a really fun deadline for me to kind of work towards. It's often a fun creative challenge to do something in a particular theme or for a particular category. And I now think completely differently about entering shows than I did before I had taken the leap and tried it. And I think it's the same with the magazines. So this might speak to you if you're a quilt pattern designer and you haven't had a quilt in a magazine. You might be putting up sort of mental barriers of like, oh, I can only do that when I've sold so many patterns, or when my blog gets so many visitors, or whatever kind of mental thing you've put in your mind about why you can't be in the magazine. And I think I'd probably done that as well. Like, I'm not a professional anything. I'm just on YouTube and I'm just trying stuff and designing quilts because I like to. And I can't really pinpoint what made me think, maybe I should just do it anyway. But sometimes I just get in these moods where I'm like, oh, whatever, let's just see what happens. And I think that's the mood I was in when I submitted the pattern. And sometimes good things can come out of that. So I would recommend, if you've got some sort of an idea in your head about things you can and can't do, whether it's in the quilting world or somewhere else in your life, maybe every once in a while, just have a little rethink about why we're putting that barrier there, and whether it's really a real barrier that you can't get past, or whether it's something you've just created to kind of keep yourself feeling a bit safer, not having to put yourself out there. So anyway, digression. If you've not seen the channel before, oh, am I the queen of digressions? Anyway, so where was I? So I was talking about the price. So the price when I signed the contract, and it might be different now, I don't know, and it might even be different for different quilts, I have no idea. But for me, it was $180. And of course, you have to sign a contract with some deliverables, right? So things you're going to give them in order to get paid. So I needed to write out the pattern instructions. I needed to take step-by-step photos of making the FPP block that was the main part of the pattern. And I needed to deliver a physical sample of the quilt. So I needed to make the quilt and send it to them. And in order to make that physical sample, they also helped with fabrics. So Lorna, the contact I had at the time, she liked the colorways I had in the sample mock-up image. And so she literally went around the Love Patchwork and Quilting office and collected scraps, so little bits that I could use in the different colorways. So I got this little bundle from her, which was so cool, of just these leftovers from whatever they were doing in the office. And I supplemented that with some of my own scraps. And then for the bits that I needed to kind of supplement that, including the backing fabric, she hooked me up with Wool Warehouse, and there was a really lovely lady there who helped me to find the extra bits of fabric that I needed. I supplied the batting, so I just used my own for that and my own thread, right? And my quilt is in an issue that where the tagline is so green, dive into your fabric stash and do some eco sewing. So it's all about scrappy and stash busting, and that's what all of the patterns were about. So it might be slightly different if you're proposing a pattern with a particular fabric line, or for a different kind of theme in a different magazine even, right? They might have a different process for whether or not you get supplied the fabric or not. I've only done it this one time. I only know my one experience. So then I got to work making the sample, of course. And as I did that, I was taking what's called the step out photos, which are the photos of each step in the process. So it's the same kind of photos I would take if I was doing a written tutorial on my website or on my blog, that kind of thing. And then also writing down the steps. And they did have a whole style guide to follow with kind of where they wanted punctuations, how they wanted, you to denote like an inch or things like that. So different magazines would have different guides for that, where they want capital letters, all that kind of stuff. And I also did, because I said this is like my favorite quilting magazine, I subscribed to it, which is why it was the one I approached. So I went and looked back at my stash of past issues and tried to find other foundation paper piecing patterns, and just to see how they had broken up the steps and the way that they referred to things. So I kind of used those as a template, and then obviously just subbed in my information for my pattern in there. And that was more just to make sure that I had the style that they were looking for in the text itself. So I went ahead and submitted that. That was all fine. There was no edits. Nobody asked me to take new photos, nothing like that. And then I sent in my sample. So I approached them in July, got the yes in August. The deadline was in October, I think. I know I sent the text and the photos and the sample in October. I can't remember if I was slightly early on the deadline or not. But anyway, it was October. I sent it all in. And what I was told then was that they had kind of scheduled it for an issue in March 2025. So this is October 2024 when we're talking and when I'm sending in the sample. But in the end, that moved to, obviously it's April now. Things like this, they don't always know the schedule of what they're going to publish. It sounds like things maybe move around and they have a rethink and shuffle of the things that they've agreed to. So I did get paid back in October when I submitted all the deliverables. So you get paid before it appears in the magazine. And for this one, my understanding is that now that the magazines come out, I think then they're going to get it in touch and I'm going to get the sample back. So I will actually get the quilt. They don't keep the quilt. Although I have, in one of the digital magazines that I submitted a pattern to, I had an option for that. Because I was sending it to the States. It wasn't even a quilt, it was just a cushion, but cushion cover. But anyway, I had the option of whether or not I wanted to have it returned or not. And if I didn't have it returned, then I got the rights to the photos that they took of them, of the cushion cover. So I opted for that and I let them keep the cushion cover. So I got the photos instead. So I think there are different arrangements for that, probably with different magazines. Some of them might want to keep your actual sample, I don't know. The whole process was pretty straightforward, to be honest. And the whole thing it's the same as what I was talking about with the quilt shows, much scarier in my head than when I was doing it for real. So, you know, sending the email, once it's sent, like if they don't reply or they say no, what's the worst that's going to happen? Nothing, you're still where you were, kind of thing. And then once they say yes, then you're just, you know, it's just back and forth with what they need and what you can provide and making sure you meet the deadlines, right? And we know I'm a deadline girl. I love a good deadline. It really motivates me. So that part I quite liked. The only bit, I suppose, for me, that's, you know, wouldn't be exactly what I would want is the waiting, you know. I'm not a good waiter. So like I was wanting to see it come out, you know, I was ready to see it come out as soon as I'd sent it in October, but that's not how magazines work. So we gotta be patient, right? But it's finally out, so I'm really pleased. And I would love it if some of you go out and buy the magazine and try making the quilt and let me know how you get on. And I'd love to see your versions and all the different colors you choose. If you are watching this so far in the future that it's 6 months since the magazines come out, I will have a link in the video description to where you can buy the pattern. But right now, April 2025, if you want that Scrappy pattern, you need to buy issue 149 of Love Patchwork and Quilting. And you can get it digitally or you can get it in print. And I think you can get it in the US, where I know some of you are, and I think in Canada. So I will put as many links as I can in the video description box so that you can buy the issue or even get a subscription if you want. And I'd love to hear your feedback if you try the pattern. If you're new here and you've not visited the channel before, I make scrap quilts all the time because I generally buy other people's scrap fabric. So anything from my sewing room is somebody's scrap. And I love color coordinating my scraps. I love doing a bit of improv sometimes and also sewing with old jeans and things like that. I don't follow a whole lot of quilting rules. And in fact, I've started a whole online quilting community called Scrap Club, where the only rule of Scrap Club is that there are no rules. So it's basically a no quilt police area for any level of quilter. We've got some super supportive and super creative quilters in the group, and we meet online once a month. We do a massive show and tell, and we're working on a really fun group quilt right now. So if you are looking for your online quilting people and you haven't found them yet, I'll put the information all about Scrap Club in the description box of the video. And if you've not subscribed to the channel and you've liked this video, I hope you'll consider it. And I hope to see you next time. Thanks so much for spending time with me. Bye.